At night, the United States appears almost without edges, a field of light stitched together by roads, aircraft, data, money, and power. Its decisions reach far beyond its borders. Its machines have crossed oceans, split the atom, carried human beings to the moon, and helped build a world connected in real time. But rewind the light. Remove the highways. Unbuild the cities. Pull back the borders past 1776, past the colonies, past the first European sails, and the familiar story dissolves. How did one of the world's most powerful nations emerge from a continent already inhabited by millions of people? This is not the story of an empty land being found. It is the story of peoples, empires, ideas, migrations, violence, resistance, invention, and a political experiment still unfinished. Long before the name America, human communities lived across these continents. Archaeology confirms a human presence extending back at least many thousands of years. The earliest dates and migration routes remain subjects of continuing research. Indigenous histories also preserve origins and relationships to place that cannot be reduced to a single migration diagram. North America was never one culture. In the Arctic, communities developed technologies for ice and sea. Along the Pacific coast, rich fisheries supported complex societies. In the Southwest, farmers engineered settlements, irrigation, and long-distance exchange. Across the plains, woodlands, and Southeast, people hunted, farmed, governed, built towns, created ceremonial landscapes, and traded materials over immense distances. Centuries before Columbus, the Mississippian city, now called Cahokia, stood near the Mississippi River, with plazas, neighborhoods, and monumental earthworks. Elsewhere, confederacies and sovereign nations developed their own laws, diplomacy, languages, and beliefs. The continent Europeans entered was populated, political, and connected. And its peoples are not confined to the past. Indigenous nations endured catastrophe and dispossession, adapted, resisted, and remain sovereign communities in the present. Europeans were not the first outsiders to reach North America. Norse voyagers established a settlement at Lonsaw Meadows in Newfoundland around the year 1000. Their presence did not create sustained Atlantic colonization. That changed in 1492. Sailing for the Spanish crown, Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic and reached islands in the Caribbean in October. He did not discover an uninhabited world, and he never reached the land that would become the continental United States. Yet his voyage helped initiate sustained contact between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. The resulting Columbian exchange moved crops, animals, people, and diseases across oceans. It also opened an era of conquest, forced labor, mass death, and ecological transformation. For indigenous peoples, contact was not one moment. It became centuries of upheaval. Spain, France, the Netherlands, and Britain built different colonial systems across North America. St. Augustine, founded by Spain in 1565, became the oldest continuously inhabited European established settlement in the present-day United States. England founded Jamestown in 1607. Plymouth followed in 1620. Colonies survived through uneasy combinations of indigenous knowledge, trade, alliance, warfare, migration, and imperial support. Europeans brought epidemics to populations with no prior exposure. Settlers occupied land through purchases, coercion, war, and treaties that were often contested or violated. Colonial wealth also became bound to forced labor. In 1619, a group of captive Africans arrived in English Virginia, an important early event in the development of racial slavery there, though slavery in the Americas had a longer and wider history. Over generations, colonial law hardened human bondage into an inheritable racial system. Enslaved Africans and their descendants built wealth they were forbidden to own. By the 18th century, Britain's 13 mainland colonies had grown in population and economic power. They were not yet a nation. They were colonies inside an empire. After Britain's victory in the 7 Years' War, Imperial debt and new policies changed the relationship between Parliament and the colonies. The Stamp Act of 1765 taxed printed materials. Colonists protested that Parliament was taxing them without colonial representation. Confrontation escalated. British soldiers killed 5 colonists in the Boston Massacre on March 5, 1770. Protesters destroyed tea in Boston Harbor on December 16, 1773. Britain answered with coercive laws. In 1774, delegates met in a Continental Congress. On the night of April 18, 1775, Paul Revere, William Dawes, Samuel Prescott, and other writers helped spread a warning through Massachusetts. The next day, fighting at Lexington and Concord began the Revolutionary War. No one knows who fired the first shot at Lexington. In Philadelphia, the Second Continental Congress moved from petition to separation. Thomas Jefferson became the principal drafter of a declaration reviewed by a 5-member committee and debated by Congress. Congress approved independence on July 2nd, then adopted the wording of the Declaration on July 4, 1776. Most delegates did not sign the engrossed parchment that day. Its language proclaimed equality and unalienable rights. Its reality was narrower. Women lacked equal political power. Indigenous nations were treated as obstacles or enemies. Hundreds of thousands remained enslaved. The distance between principle and practice would shape the nation's future. Independence still had to be won. George Washington's Continental Army survived defeat, shortage, and winter. The American victory at Saratoga encouraged a formal French alliance in 1778. French soldiers, money, weapons, and naval power proved decisive. On October 19, 1781, British General Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown to American and French forces. The war formally ended with the Treaty of Paris, signed on September 3, 1783. Britain recognized an independent United States. Victory did not guarantee stable government. Under the Articles of Confederation, Congress lacked reliable revenue and the power to regulate interstate commerce. In 1787, delegates met in Philadelphia and designed a stronger federal system. The Constitution, signed on September 17th, divided power among legislative, executive, and judicial branches. It also divided authority between the federal government and the states. Each branch could limit the others. The compromises were profound and dangerous. The Constitution protected the transatlantic slave trade from federal prohibition until 1808, strengthened federal obligations concerning escaped enslaved people, and counted 3/5 of the enslaved population for representation while granting them no political rights. The new system took effect in 1789. George Washington served as the first president from 1789 to 1797. The first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, were ratified in 1791, protecting liberties while leaving the struggle over who could fully exercise them unresolved. From Washington onward, the presidency expanded, contracted, and changed with the country. Jefferson oversaw the Louisiana Purchase. Jackson enlarged presidential power while Indian removal drove native nations west. Lincoln preserved the Union and issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Theodore Roosevelt linked the office to progressive reform and global influence. Franklin Roosevelt answered depression with the New Deal and led through most of the Second World War. Later presidents governed through the Cold War, Civil Rights Revolution, Vietnam, Watergate, conservative resurgence, the end of the Soviet Union, terrorism, financial crisis, pandemic, and a transformed media age. A presidential timeline is not the whole nation. Congress, courts, states, movements, workers, voters, non-voters, and people denied the vote have all redirected American history. The United States grew across a continent, but the map's expanding colors concealed other people's losses. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803 doubled the country's claimed territory. Though France sold lands inhabited by sovereign indigenous nations it did not truly control. Settlement accelerated. In the 1830s, federal removal policy forced Cherokee, Muskogee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, and other peoples from eastern homelands. Thousands died. The Cherokee ordeal became known as the Trail of Tears. The United States annexed Texas in 1845. The Oregon Treaty set a boundary with Britain in 1846. War with Mexico ended in 1848 with the United States acquiring an enormous western territory. California entered the Union in 1850. Every acquisition intensified one explosive question. Would slavery expand? Slavery was not a regional footnote. Enslaved labor powered the cotton economy, and its profits moved through northern mills, merchants, insurers, and banks, as well as southern plantations. Enslaved people resisted in countless ways. Free black activists, formerly enslaved abolitionists, religious reformers, and interracial networks attacked the institution. The Underground Railroad was not one route, but a shifting system of people and safe places. Political compromises delayed crisis, but could not resolve it. The country was becoming larger and less able to contain its central contradiction. Abraham Lincoln won the election of 1860 without carrying the Deep South. 11 slaveholding states seceded and formed the Confederacy. Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter in April 1861. Civil war followed. The Union fought first to defeat secession. Enslaved people transformed the conflict by escaping to Union lines, withholding labor, sharing intelligence, and pressing freedom onto the national agenda. On January 1863, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation declared enslaved people free in areas still in rebellion. It did not abolish slavery everywhere, but it changed the war and authorized large-scale black military service. At Gettysburg in July 1863, Union forces turned back a Confederate invasion. The war continued for nearly 2 more years. On April 9, 1865, Robert E. Lee surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. Other Confederate forces surrendered afterward. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery in 1865, except as punishment for crime. The 14th defined national citizenship and equal protection. The 15th prohibited denying the vote on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Reconstruction briefly opened a remarkable experiment in interracial democracy. Black Americans built schools, reunited families, created institutions, voted, and held office. White supremacist violence, discriminatory law, and declining federal enforcement then stripped away many gains. Formal slavery ended. The struggle over freedom did not. After the Civil War, railroads, steel, oil, electricity, and mass production rearranged American life. A national market linked farms, mines, factories, ports, and cities. New York and Chicago grew vertically and outward. Millions of immigrants and rural migrants supplied labor and transformed neighborhoods, politics, religion, food, and language. Fortunes reached a scale that seemed almost unimaginable. So did inequality. Factory discipline meant long hours, repetitive labor, dangerous machinery, child labor, and unstable employment. Workers organized unions and strikes. Companies, courts, police, and governments often resisted them. Industrialization made goods cheaper, travel faster, and communication nearly instant. It also concentrated power, polluted air and water, and produced crowded urban poverty. The modern American economy was taking shape, along with arguments over who should control it. By the end of the 19th century, industrial strength supported overseas ambition. The Spanish-American War of 1898 expanded American influence in the Caribbean and Pacific and placed the Philippines under U.S. rule after a brutal conflict. The United States entered the First World War in 1917. Its manpower, industry, and finance helped shift the balance, but the post-war country turned inward. The 1920s brought consumer credit, radio, cars, cultural experimentation, immigration restriction, racial violence, and resurgent nativism. The stock market crash of 1929 did not alone cause the Great Depression, but it became the symbol of a wider collapse. Banks failed, unemployment soared. Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal expanded federal action through relief, regulation, public works, and social insurance, without ending inequality or fully ending the Depression. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. The United States entered a global war. American factories mobilized at extraordinary speed. Women entered industrial work in vast numbers. Black Americans pressed a double V. Victory against fascism abroad and racism at home. The armed forces remained segregated. The U.S. government also incarcerated more than 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry, most of them U.S. citizens, under Executive Order 966. American, British, Canadian, and other Allied forces landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944. In the Pacific, the United States fought an island war toward Japan. Germany surrendered in May 1945. In August, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Soviet Union entered the war against Japan. Japan announced its surrender. The war ended, leaving the United States economically powerful, nuclear-armed, and central to a new international order. Victory produced a new rivalry. The United States and Soviet Union built competing alliances, nuclear arsenals, intelligence systems, and global spheres of influence. The United States helped create the United Nations and joined NATO. The Korean War began in 1950 after North Korea invaded South Korea. U.S. forces fought under United Nations command. Cold War fear entered schools, laboratories, films, and family life. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 brought the nuclear powers terrifyingly close to direct conflict. In Vietnam, escalating U.S. intervention led to a long war, mass protest, and deep distrust of government. Competition coexisted with negotiation. By 1991, the Soviet Union had dissolved. The United States emerged from the Cold War as the world's predominant military and economic power, but not an uncontested one. American democracy was also being challenged from within. After Reconstruction, Jim Crow laws and racial terror enforced segregation and disfranchisement across much of the country. Discrimination in housing, work, education, and policing extended far beyond the South. Black communities had resisted for generations. In the 20th century, legal campaigns, local organizing, labor activism, journalism, and direct action converged. After Rosa Parks was arrested in Montgomery in December 1955, a 381-day bus boycott showed the power of coordinated community action. Martin Luther King Jr. became a national voice, but the movement depended on thousands of organizers, many of them women and young people whose names received less attention. The March on Washington gathered in August 1963. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 attacked segregation and employment discrimination. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 targeted barriers that had kept black citizens from the polls. These laws changed the nation. They did not erase unequal wealth, discrimination, or conflict over voting and citizenship. The civil rights movement was not a completed chapter. It widened the constitutional argument over what equality requires. The Cold War also turned the sky into a frontier. After the Soviet Union launched Sputnik in 1957, the United States created NASA in 1958. Mercury proved Americans could fly in space. Gemini tested rendezvous, docking, and endurance. Apollo attempted the moon. On July 20, 1969, Apollo 11's lunar module landed in the Sea of Tranquility. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the surface while Michael Collins orbited above. The achievement depended on hundreds of thousands of workers, universities, contractors, and public investment, not only the 3 astronauts seen on television. The space shuttle made reusable orbital flight possible. Though never routine or risk-free, the International Space Station turned orbit into a place of long-term international cooperation. Robotic spacecraft explored Mars and the outer solar system. In the 21st century, government programs and private companies opened a new period of launch, satellite, lunar, and deep space ambition. Another revolution moved through circuits. Federal research, universities, private firms, and global supply chains helped drive advances in computing. ARPANET sent its first message in 1969. The personal computer brought processing onto desks. The Internet connected networks. The World Wide Web made them easier to navigate. Smartphones placed cameras, maps, markets, and media in billions of hands. American companies became central platforms in global communication and commerce. Their tools created new industries and concentrated extraordinary private power. Social media expanded speech and community while accelerating surveillance, manipulation, harassment, and misinformation. By 2026, artificial intelligence could generate language, images, software, and scientific hypotheses. The central question was no longer whether digital systems would shape society. It was who would design them, govern them, profit from them, and be accountable when they failed. The United States is 50 states, the District of Columbia, territories, tribal nations, and hundreds of millions of individual lives. It stretches from Arctic Alaska to tropical Hawaii and from Atlantic cities to Pacific islands and coasts. There is no single American culture. Indigenous traditions continue and change. African American creativity shapes spirituals, blues, jazz, rock, hip-hop, literature, dance, language, and politics. Latino communities connect histories older than the current border with later migrations from across the Americas. Asian American, Pacific Islander, European American, Middle Eastern, and African immigrant communities have remade regions and institutions. Every category contains differences of class, faith, generation, language, and place. Thanksgiving, Independence Day, Halloween, Christmas, Juneteenth, Lunar New Year, Diwali, Eid, regional festivals, sports, Hollywood, country music, jazz, and hip-hop coexist, not as one tradition, but as overlapping claims about belonging. The economy is equally varied. Services, manufacturing, agriculture, energy, finance, healthcare, entertainment, aviation, research, logistics, and technology. Economic statistics describe different things. GDP measures production. Income is a flow of earnings. Wealth is assets minus debts. Government revenue is money collected by public institutions. Household income measures resources received by households. It is not national GDP divided evenly among people. The Bureau of Economic Analysis reported that real GDP increased at a 1.5% annual rate in the second quarter of 2026, an advance estimate, subject to revision. One number cannot reveal who benefits, who is insecure, or how opportunity is distributed. The Constitution does not place the President above Congress and the Supreme Court in a chain of command. It creates separate branches with different powers. Congress writes federal laws, taxes, and spends, confirms many appointments through the Senate, and can impeach and remove federal officials through separate House and Senate actions. The President executes federal law, conducts diplomacy, commands the armed forces under constitutional and statutory limits, nominates judges and senior officials, and can veto legislation. Federal courts decide cases and interpret law. The Supreme Court is the highest federal court. States retain broad authority over matters including elections, education, policing, and local government within federal and constitutional limits. Tribal nations possess inherent sovereignty, though federal law has repeatedly constrained it. Political parties organize competition but are not branches of government. In presidential elections, voters choose slates of electors. The Electoral College currently has 538 electors. 270 are required to win. Checks and balances can prevent abuse. They can also produce stalemate. The system depends not only on text but on norms, participation, administration, and public trust. The presidency began with George Washington in 1789. 45 individuals have held the office across 47 numbered presidencies because Grover Cleveland, and now Donald Trump, served non-consecutive terms. Donald J. Trump first served from 2017 to 2021. Joe Biden served from 2021 to 2025. Trump returned to office on January 20, 2025, becoming the 47th president as well as the 45th. As of this documentary's editorial date, August 24, 2026, he is the incumbent president. That fact is historical, not an endorsement. Presidencies must be judged through evidence, institutions, consequences, and time, not campaign imagery. On July 1, 2026, the Census Bureau estimated the United States population at approximately 342.6 million. The country remained a center of finance, science, higher education, entertainment, agriculture, manufacturing, military power, and technological development. It also faced aging infrastructure, housing pressure, unequal health outcomes, climate risk, demographic change, contested immigration policy, and intense political division. Artificial intelligence promised productivity and discovery, while raising new questions about work, energy, privacy, bias, copyright, and control. America in 2026 was neither a Finnish superpower nor a nation in one single crisis. It was a continental federation negotiating rapid change through old institutions. America has always contained arguments it could not escape: freedom and slavery, democracy and exclusion, opportunity and inequality, expansion and indigenous dispossession, immigration and restriction, innovation and environmental cost, global leadership and division at home. To acknowledge those contradictions is not to dismiss the nation. It is to understand it. The United States was not simply discovered on a map. It emerged from worlds already old, then changed through colonization, revolution, forced labor, removal, migration, civil war, institution building, protest, invention, and repeated demands that its principles include more people. America is a place. It is also an argument over power and rights, memory and belonging, what the country has been, and what it might become. Its history is not a straight line toward greatness or decline. It is a record of choices, victories and failures, promises kept and broken, systems built and challenged. And every generation inherits the same unfinished question: what will America become next?